Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and I'm thrilled about today's episode because our guest has worked with hundreds of corporations and government agencies, including the U.S. Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, Chase Bank, Estee Lauder, NASA, and Jefferson Health to help hundreds of people reach new heights of effectiveness by helping them understand themselves and others better. His name is Tony Chatman, and it is a real privilege to have him on today's show because he is going to share some insights into how to lead teams in a way where everyone wins and how to create more engagement in organizations, which if you're a longtime listener to the show, you know that engagement is so crucial to positive leadership. So let me tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to jump into what's going to be a terrific conversation. So as a subject matter expert and recognized thought leader in the area of workplace relationships, Tony Chatman has devoted his adult life to understanding what makes people tick, how to bring out the best in people, including ourselves, and how to pass this information on in simple yet practical terms. Whether it's addressing our hidden biases, helping navigate disruption and change, or providing leaders with skills that make them indispensable, Tony provides practical solutions that aligns with people's real-world experiences. Tony is a professional speaker who delivers presentations that are entertaining and impassioned balance of both science and practical insight. His ability to help leaders, team members, and people from every background and diversity adopt empowering mindsets and strategies that allow them to adapt, reinvent, and transform the results they produce both personally and professionally. He has a profound ability to connect with every audience member to ensure they come away feeling that he spoke directly to them and impacted by his message. And that is certainly what we aim to do in this show. And that is part of why I'm just so thrilled to have Tony here. So welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast, Tony.
Thanks, Alex. I'm so excited to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm really excited to dive into our conversation because I know when we were sharing information prior to, jumping on this episode, some of the key ideas that you put out there were so interesting. So just to get us started, because I ask all my guests this, it's a crucial question because, of course, this is the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. What does positive leadership movement mean to you?
So let me share a story.
Sure.
I have a really good friend. We're really close. And when I say close, I mean, he and I are like this, but so are our wives and our children. And so you can imagine how shocked I was when I found out that once again, he was being deployed to Afghanistan.
Oh,
so we had a party at my house and we had about 40 friends. And during that time, we ate and drank and laughed. And then at one point we circled around and we shared just about how much we were going to be there for him and our commitment to he, but not only him, his family. We'd make sure that all their needs were met, they'd be safe. And during this whole time, there was one person I was really interested in hearing him share because he was a high-ranking official in the Army, and he'd been to a lot of these types of things before. Mm-hmm. But I was in no way prepared for what he would say. Because what he said was, he said, you are what we refer to as a force multiplier. Because by your very presence, you bring out the best in everything and everyone around you. Mm. And when I heard that, to me, when I think now of positive leadership, that's it. It's the idea that because you're there, everyone's better. Not some, everyone's better. And you understand how to navigate those relationships in a way that brings out the best in every person.
Oh, I love that. And so powerful. Thank you for sharing that beautiful story too, because just even within that setting, I mean, it's a powerful phrase. I've never heard that before either, force multiplier, but then to apply it back into, you know, not just military life, but into organizations, even into our personal lives in terms of making people better around us. I just love that. So tell us more about this concept of force multiplier, because I think you've actually even written a book around this, right? I think it's called The Force Multiplier, How to Lead Teams Where Everyone Wins. So tell us about this force multiplication and how it relates to teams.
Sure. So, like you, I had never heard the phrase before either. And it turns out that even in the military, it's a phrase that's normally applied to tools and not to people. Because what it is it's a tool that, for example, like a lever, right? You push down on the lever and you're able to lift heavy weights because it multiplies the amount of effort that you put in, or a hammer or
Right.
a shovel.
Yep.
But the idea of it being people, that the effort that a person puts in is now multiplied, or a team puts in is now multiplied because of this person who is able to bring out the best in everyone. To me, that was like a whole new, it was like a paradigm shift. My eyes opened in a new way. And it wasn't that it was a new idea, but I never had the language to really express it. And so now when you talk about teams, I think it's important because normally we start defining leadership and we think of things like, turning the ship, and leaders have followers. And, there's a lot of phrases that are very accurate, but the thought of without a leader being there, things wouldn't be as good as they are now, or even more so because of a leader's presence, things are better, and that you could quantifiably measure it, whether it's, in productivity, or whether it's in, loyalty and turnover or resilience, that this person or these people are able to be there, and they take people from potential to actually, living out who they're to be. I think that's just such a powerful idea.
Yeah, and not that common, sadly, right? And that's why I actually called this podcast the Positive Leadership Movement, because it needs to gather steam. It needs to become more prevalent. And the idea that you're talking about, where it's like we have leaders that want to lift people up, and by their mere presence, as you said, they're making people better. I love it. It's such a powerful concept. So what prompted you to write the book?
So for me, I was already speaking and training and doing all these fun things. And you just start to see patterns, right? I'm no matter where I was in the country, you saw the same patterns that people were frustrated with their supervisors for some very basic areas, or you saw the supervisors having these really large skill gaps. And most of them were trainable, but they just weren't being met. And so I started thinking to myself, okay, well, there's lots of books on leadership. What's going on? And normally when I would talk to these leaders, they had all the books on their bookshelf. But the truth is, most of those books are far more theoretical than practical.
Right.
And the idea of giving people what's almost like a manual to say, okay, I can't be there with you on this journey, but here's what you can learn today that you can put into practice and make you not a better CEO, but in your space, a better leader based on your ability to influence other people. And so that was really the impetus of it. Now, what's funny is before that force multiplier incident, I was going to call the book Why I Hate My Job, right? It's almost like the exact reason you have this movement you have, because
right.
Most people couldn't say, oh, I've had 3 great supervisors in a row, or I've even had 2. It's like, okay, so why are people love what they do, but they don't love who they're doing it for. So let's change that around so that, people can, the very place where they spend the majority of their time, they can enjoy it and be more fulfilled there versus having to shake that off to get back to their regular life.
Yeah, amen. Because we spend way too much time at work to not have it be enjoyable. I mean,
right.
When you think about it that way, it really needs to be. So without giving away the whole game here, tell us, can you share with us some of those practical strategies that are in the book that help these leaders fill those skill gaps, or harness what you're saying here, this idea of force multiplication, and help them create better teams and be better leaders?
Sure. I'll give you like a super simple one to start with, and that is having a positive attitude all the time, because you're always on. So when I was first promoted to being a supervisor, my mentor said something I'll never forget. He pulled me aside and he said, "Congratulations, Tony. You just lost the luxury of having a bad day." I was like, I was shocked, because I never thought of having a bad day as a luxury, right? But the reality that because you're affecting so many people, you may have a bad moment, but you can't afford to have a bad day, because that will permeate your entire group. And there are studies that show you can measure the productivity of a team by their emotional state, which Absolutely. Is, back to why we need this positive leadership movement, right?
Right.
So you got to be positive, because that positive emotion is contagious in the same way that a yawn is contagious, right? So
Absolutely. Being
able to do something as simple as that, but to keep it in your head in those moments, like, I'm frustrated, but I got to be on. I got to, it's like when your kid's hurt and at one point you're overwhelmed, but you're like, for their sake, I have to be in a different emotional state. The same thing happens in leadership. So I think that's like a super basic, simple one, but it's one that's often not really considered.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, this whole notion of positive energy is, I actually talk about that as like the number one untapped resource in organizations. And guess what? It's free, because you have people who are energizers and you have people who are de-energizers. The people that you just like, you have an interaction with them and you just want to like go to sleep afterwards, or you just like, oh my, are you kidding me? They're complaining again. Like they just sap the energy out of the room, right? And so we want to obviously multiply, to using your language, we want to multiply the positive energy, right? And yes, that absolutely resides with the leader, right? And having the leader bring people along. But just to play devil's advocate a little bit though, I mean, what if I really I'm genuinely having a bad moment? Like, I have to acknowledge that. No, I mean, I can't just stuff it all down, because if I stuff all those emotions down, they're going to come out somewhere, somehow, and maybe it won't be appropriate, right? So do you have like a process for leaders to kind of like acknowledge what's happening, but then sort of some way to regroup so they can come back to that positive place? Like how do you deal with that when you really are in a funk for a moment, or more than a moment?
Yeah, well, I think the key is, try to get it into a moment. One of the other things I talk about a lot about communication and transparency. And so there is a reality of, hey, I'm having a rough go of it, or, that meeting didn't go well. And to be transparent, that certainly creates an emotional connection and empathy with people. But then the key is to realize I can't wallow in it, right? So I can have those moments. I can use them as teachable moments to everyone around me, and they can see how I get out of it. But then I can't let that stay there, because just like I'm being transparent and modeling for them how to be open, I'm also modeling for them how to get out of it. So do you think that there's that balance?
And that's a great point, right? Like the leader is modeling behavior, right? Like whatever the leader does, people key off that, whether it's their demeanor, whether it's their actions, whatever it is. I mean, the leader sets the tone of what is happening. So, and I think your point that it's like, admit it, right? Be authentic. As you said, be transparent, because that also builds trust as well, right? Like if we have trust, then we're going to have better positive relationships. And so be human, admit that, okay, that was a doozy, but what are we going to do now, right? Let's focus on the solution instead of the problem. I love that, to just sort of like acknowledge it, but pivot and then go back to that positive place. I love it.
And in it also being able to acknowledge our mistakes. It's not just that we're having a bad moment. It's like, you know what, I messed that one up. and being able to actually apologize and show people how to do that, because that's almost become a lost art in our society, and especially in the workplace. People just saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I messed that up, or that one's on me. But doing that, what that does for your team and later how people will respond and getting people to take responsibility for situations, huge.
Absolutely, right. Because then you're creating that psychological safety of, hey, it's okay. We can admit mistakes in this team, and we're going
Right.
to, because it's going to start with me. I'm going to admit my mistake right now. And
Yep.
everybody will witness that. And still we move forward as a team, and we figure out how we're going to make it work, right? I
Right.
love it. So tell me this, you also talk about this really interesting concept called the leadership pipeline. Tell us about that. Like, what is it and why does it matter so much?
So yeah, it's funny. I have two really interesting concepts around that. The leadership pipeline is the idea that you always have to have an influx of people coming in to be able to fill the leadership gaps within an organization, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
this idea of succession planning or succession management.
Yep.
And but the thing about it for me, so it's an urban legend. There's an urban legend that states use fourth grade reading levels to determine how many prisons that they're going to open, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
I call it an urban legend because no one actually admits it, but we do know that you could take fourth grade reading levels and you could predict how many people are going to drop out of college. And we know the percentage of people within a prison that are made of college dropouts. So there's definitely an algorithm there.
Mm-hmm.
But the lesson from it is that if you wait until fourth grade to address reading levels, you're too late.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what happens with leadership. We start thinking about who's prepared for the executive suite, when they hit managing director. No, you need to be thinking about that when you really bring in supervisors. And when you're hiring people, you need to be scanning, is this person, they're going to be a good team leader, they're going to be a good supervisor? Because if not, what we'll do is we'll promote good performers, but those good performers are not necessarily good leaders. And so making sure we're aware of that pipeline and all the way, so now we can manage those relationships and make sure that they're getting the core qualifications they need to develop through the next 2 or 3 levels. That's really where it is for me, but you have to start early. And that's the problem, is a lot of organizations, they wait until the need is there, then they just fill it with who's ever there, and it doesn't work out. But if you've actually plotted this course out and you say, okay, I know I'm going to need people to fill these roles down the road, so let me start preparing them now. And then when they open up, boom, they can walk right in and be successful.
Absolutely. And, this whole notion of kind of, someone's really good at their job, so you promote them. And they go up, especially this happens in large corporations. I've seen this so many times with clients. They progress up the ladder because they're really good at what they do. But then they're in charge of a team and they don't know how to be in charge of a team. And it is a disaster to be on. I mean, I've witnessed this. It's been a disaster. And then the leader is trying to figure out, well, how can I get, John, let me say, make up a name. How can I get John to lead his team more effectively? And now it's trying to fix the problem, like as you're trying to get stuff done at the same time. And it becomes such an issue. It really becomes like a roadblock to moving the whole department forward or moving that team forward. And then poor John is sitting there, feeling inadequate, not knowing what to do. And part of it is because there was no development of that part of his professional skills. It was all about hey, you're doing a great job doing your specific skill set, but there was no development of, okay, we think John's going to be a manager. We think he's going to be a leader. We think he's going to end up as a vice president. We think he's going to move through all these levels. And to your point, it's why did they not start nurturing all of that sooner so that there wasn't this big problem, on sort of immediate big problem that no one really knows how to address or how to fix. And everyone's wondering if John's going to actually make it in the position, which is super sad because he's really good at what he does. So what are you going to do? Are you going to move him, laterally? It's hard to demote someone once you've got them up there. So what do you do with that? So it's a really powerful concept, this leadership pipeline. and starting to really see it early and nurture it early.
Yeah. And the beauty of it is you may look at the same John and say, you know what? He shouldn't be a leader. He should be a subject matter expert. That's really where he's going to bring the most value. But now we have to have a career track for him to be able to progress as a subject matter expert. Because we put John in a really bad situation where we say the only way you're going to make more money is by leading people. But that's not your skill set, right? So at some point, it's like either I lead people and fail, or I leave this company and go somewhere else. Where instead we say, okay, by developing the pipeline, we start getting in the skills. Someone may very early go, you know what? This is not for me. Okay, cool. Let's put you on a different track. We're going to set you and the company up to be successful by putting you on a separate track. But we caught it early because, like you said, once you put them in that situation, it's hard to get out if they're not doing well. You almost end up failing your way out, and then that's demoralizing for John. It's bad for the organization. It costs the organization, and it's bad for all the team members around them because they're all part of the collateral damage.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up an interesting point there too, is this idea that, it shouldn't just be one path of like, hey, you're on the leadership path, so that's it. Like either you're on the leadership path or you're not. No. I mean, some organizations need to rethink their structuring on like, how do people progress? What is their path? As you said, like, is a person a subject matter expert, or are they a leader of people, a leader of teams, or perhaps some other track that they can be on, and creating those options? Because not everybody's wanting to be a leader. Not everybody is cut out to do that, but doesn't mean they're not incredibly talented and have amazing strengths in other areas. Of course they do. And we want to be able to optimize our talent everywhere in our organization, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I love it. So one of the other things that you are very passionate about is engagement in the workplace and how leaders can impact that. So tell us your perspective on that and how leaders can create more engagement.
Okay. So engagement. I feel like people make this way too complex of a topic, right? You get, what is engagement? And it's this ethereal thing. And then you have people are fully engaged and partly engaged and disengaged and anti-engaged. Yep. Pretty soon it's like trying to find the Loch Ness monster or something. It's like, what is engagement? So I make engagement really simple. Here is what engagement is. Engagement is how much does a person care? Period. That's it. And, well, it's not period because of how much they care, what are they willing to do? That's engagement. So when a person cares, they take more ownership. They're willing to go the extra mile. They see their coworker struggling. They want to help out. That is part of caring. They put their best foot forward. They put their name on the line. They're fully invested because they care. When a person doesn't care, they say, well, that ain't in my job description. I mean, that's just right. It's the contrast. And so when we think of engagement like that, it opens up our eyes, because then we say, okay, so what drives engagement? Study after study show the thing that drives engagement is emotional commitment. And that emotional commitment primarily comes from the relationship that a person has with their direct supervisor. So what that means is the relationship a person has with their leader determines whether or not they care, period. So if we want to be a good leader and drive engagement, lead in such a way that makes people care. Build a relationship in a way that makes people care. Consider all these aspects, and that's what's going to drive it. Because what happens is many people do work in spite of their leader, not because of their leader. And yet if they that's why the original title of the book was Why I Hate My Job. I said that, right? Yeah. It's why I hate my job, because people love what they do. They don't love who they do it for. But man, if you love who you do it for, think about the commitment. We have friends that we'll go the extra mile for. If they need us in the middle of the night, we're there because we care. What if we cared that way about the people we work with, the people that we spend more time than, with them than anyone else during the day? we had that kind of care and that type of leadership, then we're going to talk about an organization that cares, that is really engaged. And then what will you see? You'll see low turnover. You'll see high productivity. You'll see, all these other metrics. You'll see resilience. You'll see creativity. You'll see teamwork, simply because they care. But as long as we have engagement as this theoretical, ethereal, multisyllabic, we got to figure out engagement. Well, I can tell you your engagement, nobody cares. It's not hard to figure out. Look, let's walk around for a minute. Have you figured it out? Once we do that, then we actually have something to work with.
I love it. Yeah, because, and you're right. I mean, it's at its very basic level. It's like, do people actually care? And to your point, I mean, there's a lot of research and data out there that, it essentially boils down to people don't leave their jobs. They leave the manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they leave because of the person that is supervising them, not because they didn't like the organization or they didn't like their job. They just couldn't deal with the person that was like overseeing them every single day. So, having that person actually take the time to make sure that people are engaged or caring about what they're doing is huge, right? It's almost like that manager has to almost take on a coaching role in that respect. So like, what's your advice to leaders who maybe they do have team members who care, that are engaged, but like whatever they're doing, whatever they've tried, they've got one or two that just seem to be out there on the periphery that, they're doing the work. It's not bad, but they're just not, as you said, they're not as committed. Like they just don't care as much. Like, what's your advice to leaders in that situation? How do you develop and sort of bring somebody over into that group of like, hey, we care, come along with us? How do you make that happen?
Sure. First, find out why. Because people are disengaged for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. Some just have life situations going on. If you're taking care of a sick parent or a child with special needs and you're overwhelmed with life and you're financially struggling, yeah, that's going to show itself. Or if you have your own personal health issues, that will show itself in your work. On the other hand, if people feel like, there is no career path for me here, I'm just kind of riding this thing out. Or what happens with a lot of people when they step into a new position, people aren't treating you based on how you're leading, they're treating you based on how the previous supervisor led them. And it takes time for them to adjust. But then if they've had multiple supervisors who haven't treated them well, kept them in the doghouse, didn't have vision for them, now they're projecting all of that on you. So finding out why is important, because each individual is going to have a different reason and a different need. And then you can have an individual game plan or roadmap for that person. So I think that's really the first thing. And one of the things that I've seen that's been very helpful for people is to have some form of a personality assessment. And I know personality assessments get overused at times and misused. But if you start to understand on the most basic level, people have different needs, different wants, different things motivate them and different things demotivate them. And we stop using ourselves as a benchmark and stop treating people the way we want to be treated, but instead treating them the way they want to be treated. It's amazing how things begin to open up. We'll communicate differently. We'll learn to reward differently. We'll learn who wants our time and who really doesn't want our time, and all of those things. And we'll figure out by doing that as we start, one of my mentors used to say, don't lead with a herd mentality. You got to lead based on individuals. Mm-hmm. So we start leading those individuals and understanding their uniquenesses and not judging them negatively on the fact that they're unique. That opens up, such broad opportunities. And I've seen this work, whether it was in, retail, I've seen this work in scientific communities, I've seen it work in federal law enforcement. I mean, they're just in a myriad of places, because in all those industries, people are still people. And figuring out, look, talk about engagement being how much I care. Care is often reciprocated. If you care about me, I start to care about you over time. Maybe it may take a little bit of time, but after a while, like, man, Alex really cares about me. And you just start to have this affinity. The leader that cares about their people genuinely and is not just using this as a strategy, they're always going to be more successful.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. And yeah, I mean, I would concur with you on the personality assessments, and even using strengths assessments, right? I mean, there's character strengths assessments. Gallup has strengths just for the workplace, but all of those assessments, they are helpful in simply understanding each other better and where people are coming from, right? So, instead of, if you understand someone's strengths, instead of Carol being the really annoying person at the meeting that once we've buttoned up our plan and what we're going to do, and then she comes along with another idea, but we're like done and want to move forward. It's like, once we understand that Carol's top strength is creativity, now it's different. Now it's like, oh, okay, Carol, like, you're the creative person on the team. This is why you always have the ideas. And then that can lead to putting her in a role that really fits that, right? And so I've seen it too. I know what you're talking about. Like, once we understand those, and it happens if you do the Myers-Briggs, which is a personality test, but any of those assessments that you choose, they have value from that perspective, that they help people understand themselves better, but they help people on the team relate to one another better too. And things that might have seemed really annoying about someone, you actually start to realize, oh, it's a strength. It's a trait this person has. This is awesome. Like, we should be optimizing this. Why are we not?
Right.
It can be really enlightening.
Yeah. And see, that's actually, so there's a reason I put a personality assessment along with the book, because everything you said is true. But then here's the thing. If people allow it to actually change the lens in which they look at people, they won't just do it at work. That's the key, right? So now all of a sudden, like, do you have children, by the way?
I have fur babies.
Yeah, fur babies. Okay, yeah, I got it, right? Okay. Yeah, I bet you your fur babies are different from one another.
Yes, they are.
Right?
Yes,
they have different personalities, right? And so, like, my children are very different from one another. And but understanding that helps me to connect with each of them the way they need me to connect with them. Same thing happens with my wife. Same thing starts to happen with all my friends. And I become far more tolerable of certain personalities because now I understand them, and I understand their intent. This isn't malicious. They're just being them, right?
Right. They're not trying to annoy me. It's just who they are.
Oh, my wife actually said that one time during one of our arguments. She goes, "No, I'm not trying to make you mad." I was like, "Yeah, but that's the key." And so when we really get that, here's the thing. One of the best ways to be a better leader is to be a better person. That's just right. The better the person, the better the potential of leader they can be. And so if you take these things and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to apply them at work, but not in my life, you're missing out. If you apply them in both, then they really start to grow within you, and they become something, and we become something. And then we'll find, hey, not only am I a better leader at work, I'm a better leader in my community, in the social group, and with my family, or even just with my roommates or my friends or whatever, because people are still people regardless of the context we put them in.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? I mean, and again, I mean, I'm really glad that you raised that point, because so often, I mean, I think it's getting better that we're acknowledging that personal and professional are not separate, but there's still, especially in the business world, this kind of default to that place of like, well, this is who I am at work, and then I leave and I'm this person at home. And yes, we do have different faces that we put on in different situations, no doubt. That's totally natural and human. But just trying to divorce those two things and keep them separate is crazy. As you said, like, you're really missing out on opportunities, because understanding yourself better, whether it comes in a work context, is absolutely going to help you in your personal relationships, and vice versa. So the more we can just be authentically who we are in each of these situations, the more we're going to be happier and thrive. But then, as we've talked about during this show, that has a contagious effect. We're always affecting the people around us. And so if we can be more authentically who we are, then it's going to allow those around us to be authentically who they are too.
Yeah, but I think the thing about that is that goes back to culture, right? We take on different personas at work because we feel that our authentic persona won't be accepted at work.
Yes.
But if we have leaders now who will accept those different personas and leverage the strength and leverage the personalities, now we're able to bring that authentic self into the workplace, and it's able to be capitalized on.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. But it really does now start with leadership.
Yes, exactly. And allowing all those differences, those individual differences to be there. And of course, the irony in all of this is there's so much data out there that backs up the fact that when you have diversity and individual differences in a team, in an organization, guess what? More creativity, more innovation, more profitability. I mean, trying to all just fit in one box is not a good idea.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's the amount of data is unbelievable. But I think what happens is, Les Brown, I used to travel with Les Brown. He used to say, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame, right? Part of what happens is, so I was having this lunch. We're supposed to be out drinking is what was supposed to happen. So we're out at a happy hour, and it was a bunch of friends, and one was a director of HR, and I hadn't talked to her in a while, and we're going about, and she starts with the you can't find any good people out there, right? So I just naturally said, well, the number one driver of engagement is a person's relationship with their direct supervisor, blah blah blah, and she just starts right after I said that, just kind of like, well, yeah, of course, and starts reciting other studies. But I think what happens is when you're in the middle of it and it's frustrating and you can't seem to get things to work, all of those principles and all of that data get thrown out the window, and you just want relief. And if we can be clear-minded enough to go back and say, but you know what? We know this is true. It may take time, and it may not be the fastest solution, but it's the better solution. Then we can make those happen. But if in the moment I just want relief, then what we'll do is we'll start asking for less diversity of race, of gender, and of thought. And we'll just want to try to make things as simple and easy as they can be. But at the same time, we're crippling our organization in doing so.
Yeah. And time is the big one right there, right? Like we have this culture, at least in the United States, where it's like, we want it fixed now. In fact, we want it fixed yesterday. And when you're dealing with people, that doesn't happen, right? I mean, you have to give these situations space and time to breathe, and you have to let it emerge, right? Like there has to be this kind of like allowing the relationship to develop, allowing the trust to develop, just giving it time that people actually see that what the leader says, the leader means, right? Like the only way they start to trust that is by seeing it happen over time. And that's really a big part of this, is like being able to allow for that time and allow for that nurturing process, right? It's like we don't plant the seed and suddenly there's a beautiful flower the next day. It's like you plant the seed and you nurture it, and then over time you start to see it sprout and grow, and then yes, it's a beautiful flower, but it didn't happen overnight.
Right. No, absolutely. It's a great analogy. Definitely.
Yeah, I love it. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I mean, you have brought up so many interesting points today. I mean, the need to have that leadership pipeline and to start early, to have your organization create different paths for people. I mean, that is just such an important piece here. And boiling engagement down to just, do people care? And let's, figure out how to make people care. Like that, I love the simplicity of that. I mean, real action items there. And your other point about, as a leader, we don't get the luxury of bad days. We can have bad moments, but we need to acknowledge them, be transparent about them, and then pivot back into the positive and model that behavior, right? That positive, energizing behavior. So thank you so much for sharing these really, actionable tools and strategies that leaders can use. Like tomorrow, they can start doing these things. That's awesome. So I know, we barely scratched the surface here. I know you have so much more to share. So how can our listeners get in touch with you? How can they connect with you further so they can get more of your wisdom, Tony?
Certainly the website, www.tonychatman.com. And you can find out what I'm doing. You can connect with me on there. It has links to all of my social media. Everything's based in Tony Chatman except for Instagram, which is for some reason Tony Chatman Speaks. You can always email me, speaker, like a person who speaks, at tonychatman.com. And I'm very available. I connect with everyone who reaches out to me because I just believe, here's the thing. I believe if force multipliers make everyone around them better, if we got more people to be force multipliers, it not only changes work, it changes our society. And if there's ever a time we needed society to be better with better people, it's now.
Oh, I love it. I love it. What better way to wrap up the show? So powerful. Thank you. Yes. Force multiply, people. It has been such a pleasure having you on the show, Tony. Thank you. And I want to thank our listeners for joining me for another episode. If you have positive leadership stories to share, or you have questions on this week's topic, or you want to connect with Tony and you didn't manage to, write down his website or his email me. I will connect you. Email me at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you. So please go about your weeks, be force multipliers out there. And I'll leave you with one final thought. As always, it's one of gratitude. Thank you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.